Welcome to Logical Logistics with your host, Joe Becht. Logical Logistics is your source for news, information, and best practices for all things logistics. Please enjoy.
This is Logical Logistics, where we cover shipping, supply chain, logistics, and everything in between. Welcome to the show. All right, this is Joe Becht. You're listening to Logical Logistics, and my guest today is Brandon Freed from the Airforwarders Association. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Joe.
Well, thanks for coming on. So let's start off. Why don't you give me a little background about yourself?
Well, I'm an incurable freight slug. I've been around the business for quite some time. I owned and operated an office of a franchised organization in the Washington area for about 25 years. Started a business right after college, selling on the streets of Los Angeles. Came back to D.C., put in 25 years here, and sold my business about 10 years ago, and then was appointed to the executive directorship of the Airforwarders Association.
Okay, so it's pretty interesting. So did you grow up in the D.C. area?
I was born in Washington, D.C., and moved to Miami as a junior high schooler. And it was there I was actually introduced to the business. I had a relative who had a freight forwarding operation. I got started actually loading trucks on those hot loading docks down there in the summer months. Then when my voice changed, I was able to go in. They invited me inside their office, which is a real luxury because they had air conditioning, and I was able to collect money over the phone. And then I did that in the summers during college. I went to college up at Syracuse University and graduated there in 1979, and then afterwards got into the business.
Wow, I can relate. I have somewhat of a similar experience of how I got into the industry as well. What led you out to Los Angeles?
A relative had a small freight forwarding operation, and that was coincidental because I needed a job, and so out I went, and basically, those were back in the days when the sales process, I think, was a bit simpler. Certainly, the sales process we see today has the same elements. Back then, you could just pound on doors. And I remember going into companies in Los Angeles and actually having to explain to them the concept of overnight delivery. This is the end of the 70s where, FedEx had only been in existence for, 6 or 7 years.
Exactly.
And their marketing had not ratcheted up to the level that we see today. Yeah. And, they certainly weren't as diversified. So I had to go in and take people by the hand and tell them that I was going to take their shipment out to the airport and put it on the next flight from Los Angeles over to New York, and that I had someone in New York who would actually deliver it the next morning. That was inconceivable to a lot of customers back then. Today it's commonplace, but back then it wasn't so much so. And that's kind of how I got started. I would knock on doors during the day. Rejection tends to become your middle name. Right. And then I would actually work with the operations people at night. It was a small operation, and that's how I learned about how to type up an airbill and how to load a container and how to drop freight at the airport. And I got to tell you that from my personal perspective, the more I learned about air cargo operations, the more comfortable I became as a salesperson.
I believe you touched on an extremely important part of the air freight forwarding, especially the sales cycle. You really need to know the nitty-gritty, the operations, the shipping. I'm glad you brought that up because I just recently saw a lecture with someone who said that she would prefer to hire the person from a city college that wants to get his hands dirty if necessary than from the Harvards and the Yales that are above that type of work and just want to focus on the marketing and the sales. So it's interesting you brought that up. Yeah.
Right.
So
anyway, so I'm sorry. So and I didn't have much of it. I was a young kid right out of school, so I didn't have much of a social life at the time because I was new to Los Angeles. I'd never been out there before, so I was just working this job. So it gave me a lot of time to hang out at the airport, and as a result, I was much more comfortable in the sales role, and I think customers detected the fact that I kind of knew what I was talking about because I was actually working the freight at night.
Right.
And things just kind of blossomed from there.
Oh, that's great. So through your rise through the industry, you wound up back in Washington D.C., and now you're with the Airforwarders Association. Can you tell me how you came about this position and a lot about the company?
Sure.
Yeah, tell us everything.
Sure. Well, I'd been running this, and I was an owner-operator of this company called AdCom Worldwide.
Okay.
And they're still in existence today. They have a new holding company. They're a division of Radiant Logistics, and so I ran the Washington office, and over the years, especially I got to tell you, Joe, it was after TWA 800 went down. I think it was at 96 or so.
Yes.
I realized, and they started to suspect Air Cargo as the culprit of that crash, which
I remember.
wasn't, but,
not to interrupt you, but I remember that was the beginning of the whole TSA process. The FAA started. We had to start doing different types of security measures. I remembered after that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. And that was, to me, that was my introduction to the reality of, this new era of air cargo security and what was going to happen. And I realized, we had I had been asked to, actually my partner at the time had been asked to serve on the board of directors of the Airforwarders Association. He couldn't do it. And since I was based in Washington, came to me and said, why don't you do it? And, these meetings take place once a quarter. At the time, I don't even think they had quarterly phone calls. And I went to the first meeting. It was right after that plane went down. And, these guys were talking about the fact that the FAA was starting to crack down on them and that, there was more scrutiny. So I went to an FAA meeting in Washington, and a bunch of FAA people brought us into a room with, accountants, lawyers, security people, and they shut the door, and there were like 4 freight forwarders in the room. Some had flown into Washington. I was the only one who was actually from the D.C. area.
Okay.
And one of them said, look, we've lost an airplane out on Long Island the other, not too long ago. And now we're here. There's this industry called freight forwarding that's giving freight to the airlines, and we here at the FAA know nothing about you.
Yeah.
And, that was my indication at that point in time that I had to get involved. We all had to get involved. We all had to become activists because, in Washington, there's nothing worse than, a regulator walking in saying, we have an idea.
Yes.
And, you don't, so a lot of times their ideas are not consistent with, furthering our business.
It's more like having a target on your back.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden, here we were below the radar screen. Now, because an airplane had gone down, cargo was suspected. It wasn't even proven to be the culprit, but it was suspected. And so I realized that if no one stood up for the freight forwarder, no one was going to be there. And so I started to get pretty involved. So when I sold my business in 2005, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but because I had been on the board of directors and I rose to chairman of the association. I was chairman during after September 11th. I saw a lot of the heightened security and was able to get involved with the newly formed TSA that was an agency stood up by by Congress shortly after September 11th through the Air Transportation Security Act. And so I just kind of slid right into the role. And back then, a lot of people on Capitol Hill wanted to pull freight off passenger planes.
Well, I believe someone that was on record and saying he wanted everything to go with just UPS or FedEx.
Yeah. And so, first of all, that wasn't workable to us. And believe it or not, it wasn't workable to them either. First of all, they didn't have enough room for all the freight forwarders' freight on their planes. But second of all, those integrated carriers depend on the airlines too to handle their overflow or, shipments to places where they might not have an aircraft. And so they didn't want, it wasn't good for any of us in various ways. So it was time to get involved, and that's what the Airforwarders Association did. That became the mission: is engagement on a daily basis with regulatory agencies here in Washington, including TSA, but beyond that, Customs and Border Protection. We now have a seat on the Commercial Operations Advisory Committee. I'm appointed to that now, and we also deal with Department of Commerce. We have a seat on the Committee for Supply Chain Competitiveness. So we're a DOT. So we're at all the agencies right now on a consistent basis. We have a lobbyist on staff, and our job is to the Airforwarders Association mission is to allow the members to focus on running their day-to-day business, knowing that we're watching out for their interests in this increasingly regulatory world. That we're people would say we're deregulated, but we're really de facto regulated.
Yes.
We have a number of agencies looking at us and imposing regulations and thinking of imposing regulations upon us, and that's what the AFA does. We're like your office in Washington.
Great. How many members?
About 300 right now.
Okay.
And we're always looking for more. But being a member of the Airforwarders Association is we look for members who not only want to join us but want to contribute. We have some very active committees. We have a regulatory compliance committee where we actually have about 15 members, but we have a waiting list of folks who want to get involved in that. And each member of our committees has a certain area of regulatory scope that they're in charge of, and they come to the meetings prepared to make presentations. We have attorneys with us as well, giving us their opinions. We have surety insurance companies with us in the committee. We have an active e-commerce committee where we're looking at online retailing and what that's going to do, the online ordering phenomenon, what's that doing to our business from a last mile standpoint. We have a conference committee, membership committee. So we've got a lot of activity going on here, and we by the types of companies that we have in the association, we run the gamut from what I call the intergalactics, your Kuehne+Nagel's, your Schenkers, your Panalpinas,
okay,
all the way, to the mom and pops, the Fred Freights of the world, the small guys as
sure.
well. And most of these companies play in the international arena, but most all also handle domestic traffic as well.
Okay, so for focusing, that's great. I was going to ask you what kind of companies, and you hit a wide array of different companies. How does the smaller company take advantage of what you have to offer as far as members?
Well, one of the things that's small, I think what you need to do is when you first join the Airforwarders Association, we add you to what we call our airmail list. Airmail is this emergent message system that we put our members on so that you could see what we're following. And we don't send a lot of junk. So if you hear from us, usually it's because I want you to know something. We sent a couple messages on Friday as an example about a requirement that's coming up where forwarders are going to have to make sure, or shippers are going to have to make sure ocean containers are weighed before they tender, starting in July.
Okay.
That's a concern. We had a frequently asked questions document that our regulatory compliance committee put together. We have the automated commercial environment, the A system, which is a single window that President Obama has ordered the U.S. government offer as its or impose as its interface when you're trying to clear goods coming into the United States, as well as export. We're looking at export regulations that are being proposed right now, where the forwarder is going to have to do a lot more than they currently do. So the thing I would say to the smaller member is make sure you're on the airmail list. You don't hear from me, that means that it's getting stuck in your spam trap. So make sure that those are clear and they'll accept us. The other thing is get involved.
Okay.
Join a committee. Get on top of it, because the most you get out of you'll get the most out of your membership when you're involved, and you're in there and you have your sleeves rolled up, and we realize that we're a member organization and we're about our membership doing things to advance the association.
Yeah, that's great. It's something that is just a wonderful organization.
And one other thing, Joe, one other thing, if I can, I want to mention this. It's important. I think the most important aspect of being part of the Airforwarders Association is the networking that we do. The learning is good too. I mean, we've got monthly webinars that we introduce, and we cover all kinds of topics. Federal Corrupt Practices Act. We're doing one now. We're building one now. We're going to do one on doing business, how freight forwarders are going to, what kind of impact doing business with Cuba is going to, have on freight forwarders. So we cover all kinds, hazardous material issues, that type of thing.
Sure.
But it's all about getting involved in the networking. We have an annual conference. Our annual conference is coming up in June 8th through 10th. It's going to be out in Phoenix, Arizona, and going to the conference, getting involved through the networking. We've got great speakers out there. We've invited the commissioner from Customs and Border Protection, the administrator from the TSA, and several other informative speakers. And we deal with issues that help the small forwarder run his business.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Now, is going to the industry as a whole, what differentiates air forwarders from other companies in the industry?
So, forwarders are by their very nature problem solvers. And, generally speaking, when a customer comes to us with a logistical challenge, it's the forwarder that says, tell us what you need to accomplish, and we'll come up with the best solution to make it happen. And that's why, it's funny, Joe. People say, well, with the rise of online ordering and electronic data transfer, I mean, the forwarder is going to ultimately be out of business. And I say that's not the case, because we are, it's not the planes or the trucks that are delivering the freight, it's the people.
Yes.
And there's a lot of interaction that takes place. As you know, I mean, you've been in the business for a while. You know what the type of interaction that takes place.
Oh, yeah.
I think that, that's not to say that forwarders shouldn't have, electronic ordering platforms. They should be making it easier for the customer, but never, ever shut your phone off, and never lose that personal contact with the customer, with the shipper. I think that in the end, they really need some hand-holding, and they need the creativity and the advice that these freight forwarders have through their years of experience in solving complex logistical issues.
I think that's quite an advantage and challenge, considering how much companies want to deal just with email and get away from that personal contact. But I believe entirely with you that personal contact to solve problems is essential.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I get a lot of email every day here at the association from members who've got questions about upcoming regulations, TSA issues, or whatever. And I make it my business to not rely on email solely as the means of discussion. First of all, I'm not the greatest typist, so it takes me some time to put these things together. But I'd rather pick up the phone and talk with you.
Sure.
I want to know, what your situation is, what's happening. And, that interactive discussion, I think, is good for both of us. So it gives me, there are inflections in your voice. I ask you a question, and you're not certain about an answer, I'll detect that in our discussion, and that will influence the advice I'm giving to you to the extent that I can. It's this has always been a people business, and those who taught me, and I'm sure you too, that it's going to be very hard to throw that out the window. Now, is email making an impact? Yeah, I think email creates efficiencies, and they're all good efficiencies. But in the end, that hand-holding is essential.
I agree. So we touched upon, primarily you touched upon, a lot of the challenges. Can you go over again what kind of challenges are affecting the industry as a whole?
Well, I think over and above the regulatory climate, stepping up our technology game is high on the list. I do think that, the fact that interactive personal contact is important does not negate the need to compete in an increasingly technological world. And I think that, as we progress, how we communicate with our airlines, and our regulators in terms of filing of shipping documents needs to be streamlined. And so, we look at it, we work with IATA on their e-freight initiative and the e-airway bill initiative, and I'll tell you, I tell the members this, again, we have members of all sizes. And when it comes to stepping up your technology game, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. So I urge you to go out there and check and see what's available to suit the needs of your company. But I will tell you that as time progresses, a lot of the ordering, a lot of the transactional activity that you see in this business is going to be online. You need to have a strategy in mind to deal with that. And there are lots of providers within our membership, who have solutions in place, and I think those are always worthwhile to talk to. But hiding your head and saying, well, I have a typewriter is probably not the ideal solution to future growth.
Yeah.
And I also, I got to tell you, Jay, I mean, the companies you're doing business with, they want you to be progressive. They don't want to spend all the time on the phone with you. They need occasional hand-holding, but, they want to get a POD. They don't want to have a conversation with you. They want to be able to look at it quickly. You know how that is.
Yes.
So not participating, I don't think is an option. And it's not just, unique to Airforwarders. This is a global economy. And, companies on the grow have made significant technology investments, which, by the way, for freight forwarders are getting cheaper by the day. So it's really no excuse to get involved.
That's good to know. And then through your organization, companies can learn to find those good technology strategies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which now you're saying are getting more and more affordable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, when I was on the transactional side of the business, 10 years ago, track and trace was just a real luxury.
Right.
It was expensive. Heck, now that it's gotten cheap, and so, you can bolt that on pretty quick. So that's never an issue. I think that the fewer times you have to say no to a customer, the better. You don't want to be the guy who doesn't offer the technology advances that they're looking for to make their lives easier. And that's what we're in business for, isn't it? I mean, to make our customers' lives easier.
Exactly. Definitely. So do you have data for 2015 on the air freight forwarder side? What kind of a year was 2015?
Well, we don't do a lot of extensive data analysis. We depend on the likes of IATA and others for that. We do take surveys on occasion, but you got to remember that a lot of here in the United States, you got about 4,300 forwarders who are registered with the TSA.
Yeah,
that they have to be if they're going to be shipping air freight.
Right.
And so So that's a pretty big group of forwarders. Now, some are the big intergalactics that I described earlier. Some are the medium-sized companies, and then there's some are with a guy with a telephone book and a phone sitting at a bridge table. So
Right.
So it varies, and
So
a lot of these are not public companies.
On average, what do you think yearly billing is, factoring in the higher end shankers to the lower end guy sitting at home and brokering freight?
Yeah, great question. I would say that on average, the billing is probably in the $1 million range, but
right.
Obviously, heck, you've got the big guys and they have billions of dollars a year.
Exactly.
But I think that in terms of I think a different question might be, how do things look? What is how do freight forwarders see the world right now?
That was my next question.
And
and
right. What the projections are. These are challenging times. The business has been challenging, and so some might say, well, only the strong survive. I would say that only the most creative will survive long term, and so there are a lot of influences in the world impacting the U.S. economy. Last year this time we were dealing with fuel costs.
Yes.
Gas was $4.50 a gallon. Now it's $2.50 a gallon. It's even lower.
It's lower here.
Yeah, it's lower, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was out in the Midwest a couple of weeks ago, and it was even lower. So the point is that fuel is becoming less of an issue. But there are lots of questions we need to be asking. Why certain carriers are still charging for fuel. But that aside, for the time being, we need to look at fuel as an overall economic indicator, and a low fuel costs might seem good on their face, but it's also an indicator, the economists say, of a global economy that is not very productive.
Right.
Because or a glut of gas, but really it's because the glut of gas is caused because there's no demand for it.
Yes.
Not a real great situation for business that transports goods manufactured. So that's an issue. I think, the high U.S. dollar has made exports in the United States more expensive for other countries, so that's an issue.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't forget about what's going on in China. They're
Exactly.
a big manufacturing center, and now it's starting to die down a bit. They have a growing middle class over there. I've been spending some time over in China. I was just over in Shanghai, and I've noticed that, this upwardly mobile middle class is becoming more demanding, and that means they want more in terms of their own compensation, wage growth. And, when you're manufacturing at the lowest level possible because you're selling to Walmart or whoever else, you're going to look for the cheapest manufacturing source. And, a lot of that is shifting over to the West in places like, Vietnam and
Yes.
and Thailand, other countries where it's less expensive. So in India, and I think that we're going to see far more growth there. But, like India, the problem is infrastructure issues. It's funny. Having spent time in China, I can tell you that, say what you will about the human rights aspect, and those certainly can't be minimized. But I would tell you that from a commercial perspective, they've got good road systems in place, and they're really focused. Their airports over there, they got these 5-year plans. And their airports, they're building 144 new airports in China during the current 5-year plan. Yeah, and it took us it takes us 20 years to put a new runway in Atlanta.
Right, exactly.
We think that's such an accomplishment. So, what I would say to freight forwarders is it's a big world out there. Don't ignore it. Know what's happening overseas because it's going to have an impact. Even on domestic shipments. Because generally speaking, what's driving a domestic shipment usually has something to do, tangentially with something going on internationally.
So to sum up, there's a multitude of challenges, which goes back to one of the first things you said in the interview is you have to be a problem solver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you have to have a sense of what's going on in the world. I mean, I tell that to my kids who are just starting out in their careers. Don't be that guy who doesn't read a newspaper. But you have to, have a good understanding as to how all this is fitting in. And, And by the way, and something I didn't mention earlier, hey, the Panama Canal is widening. What's that going to do with East Coast ports? And when we saw the West Coast work stoppage last year, I mean, it's what kind of an impact is that going to have? Are you looking out for your customer to make sure that if that kind of thing happens, that you always got to be up high in the crow's nest, looking for potential trouble in the supply chain. And if you have your head in the sand and you're not involved with your trade associations and you don't see what's going on in the regulatory or the legislative environment, by the way, they just passed that big highway bill that's funding our nation's infrastructure, and there are a lot of hidden gremlins in that need to be looked at. You're just not going to have an awareness, and you'll get caught blindsided.
Yeah. All right, so I really appreciate the interview. Just a couple more things. How do people find you? How do they find you? How do they find the Airforwarders Association?
Well, the quickest way to find the Airforwarders Association is via our website at airforwarders.org.
Okay.
And of course, we're one of the things I do is I write a monthly editorial in the Air Cargo World, and talking about issues that affect forwarders, and I'm always looking for ideas, and I want to address issues I think that forwarders need to be looking at. So you can always contact me by going to BFRIED, BeFreed at airforwarders.org as well.
Great. And I can attest that your communication is immediate and just great. So if you're out there and you want to contact Brandon, it's very easy to do. Finally, so the goal of this podcast is to talk about the term logistics. It's thrown out there so often. You see it on every truck. You see it in big companies. What I'd like you to do to finalize this interview, how would you define logistics? What does the term logistics mean to you?
Well, from a forwarder's perspective, that's easy. Meeting our customers' expectations consistently and seamlessly whenever. And I think that's what we're all in business for. This is a relationship-oriented business, and customers will come to us with all kinds of expectations. Every challenge is different. There's very little routine in the freight forwarding business. And that's what I like about it. That drives my passion, and I'm sure it drives yours as well. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us here at Logical Logistics. Once again, this is Brandon Freed, and you can reach him at, what was that again? Could you say it one more time?
BFRIED, BeFreed at airforwarders.org, or look at our website at www.airforwarders.org.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the show.
Visit www.beslogistics.net for more logistics, transportation, and warehousing resources. Thanks for watching.